Old women don't deserve presents. That's what my son wrote to me on my 79th birthday. No explanation, no apology. Just that sentence, sent by text at 7:42 a.m. I hadn't even had my morning tea. I sat there staring at the screen for a full minute, blinking, waiting for something else to appear. A laughing emoji, maybe. A follow-up. Just kidding, Mom. But nothing came, just silence. And in that silence, I felt something snap. Not loudly, but cleanly, like thread pulled too tight. That morning, I'd gotten up early. I always do. Not because I like it, but because after a certain age, your body becomes its own alarm clock. I'd brushed my silver hair, put on the soft blue cardigan Clara once said brought out my eyes, and brewed tea in the chipped porcelain pot James had bought me on our 15th anniversary. The card from the retirement club was already on the counter. A small bouquet of supermarket flowers, left at the door by the neighbor's boy, sat in a jelly jar. I didn't expect a party. I didn't expect cake. But I had hoped for a call or a visit. Instead, I got that. I read it again, just to be sure. Old women don't deserve presents. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe he'd meant to send it to someone else. Maybe his phone had auto-corrected a different thought into cruelty. But the more I stared at those 6 words, the more I realized, no. It was deliberate. It was blunt. And it was exactly the kind of thing Eric would say now. The boy I raised with secondhand books and tuna casseroles. The boy who used to bring me dandelions in sticky fists. He had vanished long ago. In his place was a man who visited twice a year, if that, who let his wife make all the rules, including when and if I was allowed to see my granddaughter. I tried to breathe through it, not cry. Crying felt too dramatic, too theatrical. I'd long since trained myself out of displays like that. So instead, I did what I always do. I stood up. I poured another cup of tea. And I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the yellowing wallpaper, letting the silence ring. The silence after that text said more than the words themselves. There was no follow-up, no, "Are you okay?" No, "Did you get the flowers I sent?" Because there were none. Not even a call. By 10 o'clock, I stopped pretending he'd call. I made myself a piece of toast I couldn't finish and set the rest aside. The clock ticked louder in an empty house. I opened the drawer by the fridge, where I kept old notes, receipts, a pair of James's reading glasses I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Underneath them was the envelope I'd sealed 6 months ago. My will. I'd updated it after a hospital scare that turned out to be nothing, but I hadn't made any drastic changes then. Today, I would. Not out of revenge, but because I finally saw things clearly. My son no longer saw me as a person. To him, I was a relic, a burden, an afterthought, and I would no longer leave my name and my home to someone who couldn't be bothered to speak it kindly. I took the will out of the envelope and placed it flat on the table. I ran my fingers over the ink. Eric Matthews, sole beneficiary. My son, my only child. I'd given him everything once. Every birthday cake, every dentist bill, every sleepless night. But now, on my own birthday, I had been given back only this. Old women don't deserve presents. And in that moment, I finally understood. He didn't deserve mine. There's a drawer in my bedroom I used to call the emergency drawer. Not because it held flashlights or batteries, though it had those too, but because it contained all the little just in case. Things I never wanted to think about. A copy of my will, the deed to the house, bank statements, James's death certificate, creased from too many hands and too much time. That afternoon, I sat on the edge of the bed with the drawer pulled open, papers spread out around me like a story I had tried to write in silence. Each page told part of it. A deposit slip from the year Eric lost his job, a check stub from when he needed help with a down payment, letters from banks I'd co-signed with him on, though I hadn't seen a single repayment since. There were scribbled notes in my own handwriting, reminders to talk to Eric about money, about visits, about weekends with Emily. Notes I never followed up on, because there was always a reason to wait. The truth is, I thought I was buying his love. I never would have admitted it, but deep down, I believed that if I kept giving, one day he would look at me again like he used to, like someone who mattered. But generosity doesn't buy respect. It just teaches people where your soft spots are. The folder with Emily's name on it was thinner, but it was there. Little things. A contribution to her ballet recital when she was 10. A set of books I'd ordered and had shipped to her school. The only child who still hugged me tightly, who whispered, "I missed you," every time she saw me. The only one who didn't look at me like I was something inconvenient. I placed the two folders side by side on the bed. Eric had always assumed everything I had would be his. I'd never said otherwise. But looking at those pages now, the quiet imbalance of them, I realized that what he truly wanted wasn't my life. It was just the inheritance of it. The things, the money, the house. The way he never once asked if I needed help with the roof, but always remembered to call when taxes were due. That message this morning was a cruelty, but it was also a gift. It gave me permission to stop pretending. I called my attorney just before 4 p.m. "Mrs. Matthews," he answered. "Happy birthday." The words hit me in a strange place, soft and sore. "Thank you, Jeremy," I said quietly. "I need to make changes to my will as soon as possible." "Of course." "Is there anything urgent I should know before we meet?" "I'm removing my son as beneficiary." A pause on the line, then a soft professional, "Understood." "And I'd like to replace him with my granddaughter, Emily Matthews." Another pause. "Would you like to establish a trust in her name?" "Yes, with full protection. She's only 17. We'll start the paperwork today." "You're sure about this, Mrs. Matthews?" I've never been more sure of anything. When we ended the call, I placed the phone down gently beside the folders. My fingers shook, not from doubt, but from something deeper. A lifetime of habit, unraveling. I thought I'd feel guilty, but instead, I felt still, like something inside me had been finally seated after standing for too long. At 5 I made tea. Not for anyone else, just for myself. I sat in my chair by the window, the light fading across the street, and I thought about every birthday I'd spent baking cakes for others, wrapping presents, writing cards. This time, I had gotten 6 words, a cruel sentence, but I'd finally written the next one myself. Not revenge, not a warning, a rewrite. I hadn't been to the bank in person in over a year. Most things were done over the phone now or online, but this time, I wanted to sit face to face with someone. I wanted to hear the sound of my own voice when I said what needed to be said. The morning air was cool as I stepped outside. The streets were quiet, still damp from last night's rain. I wore my beige coat, and the sensible shoes Emily once said made me look like someone who always knows where she's going. I hoped she was right. The branch manager, Mrs. Carson, greeted me by name. She always did, a woman about my age with clipped gray hair and bracelets that clinked faintly when she typed. "Mrs. Matthews?" She smiled. It's been a while. Everything okay? I need to cancel all scheduled transfers and payments associated with my son Eric Matthews, effective immediately. She blinked once, then nodded. Of course. Would you like to sit down and review them together? We sat in her glass-walled office, and she pulled up the account on her screen. There are currently 12 recurring payments tied to his household or name. Would you like to see the list? Yes. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. Mortgage assistance, utility bills, car insurance, a student loan payment, which I now remembered was his wife's niece, not even someone I knew personally. My eyes scanned the numbers. Hundreds, thousands, over the course of months. Quiet withdrawals I'd signed off on just for now. I want them all stopped, I said. No exceptions. If there are penalties, I'll accept them. Mrs. Carson nodded slowly, respectfully. Understood. I'll flag them for cancellation. You'll need to sign off, of course. She printed the forms and slid them toward me. The pen felt heavier than usual, though my hand didn't tremble. Are you sure you don't want to leave one or two of these in place? Perhaps the tuition one. No? My voice was steady. If Eric wants to support other people, he can find his own way to do it. She didn't respond, just nodded and handed me the next sheet. And the power of attorney you granted to Mr. Matthews last year. Shall we revoke that as well? I had forgotten about that. At the time, it had seemed practical. Just in case something happens, Eric had said, so I can help manage things. Yes, revoke it. Mrs. Carson made a note and added another form. As I signed each page, I felt the air in the room change. It wasn't cold, it was light, as if something had shifted. As if all those tiny, invisible threads pulling at me had finally snapped and drifted away. When we finished, she placed the forms in a folder. You'll get confirmation of each cancellation in the next 48 hours. And of the revocation. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Yes, I said, standing. There's a trust I'm opening for my granddaughter. I'll be transferring a significant sum, and I want it airtight, protected from her father or anyone else. Mrs. Carson didn't flinch. She simply nodded again. We'll make it happen. Shall I connect you with our estate specialist this week? Please. We shook hands. And for the first time in years, I walked out of the bank with nothing taken from me. No requests. No forms slipped into my purse to be signed later. Just decisions I had made, and a strange sense of peace I hadn't expected. Outside, the wind tugged gently at my coat. Leaves scattered underfoot. I looked down the street at the cafe Emily and I used to visit after her dance classes. We hadn't been in months. She was growing up fast, almost 18 now, but she still called, still sent pictures of her drawings, still wrote, "I love you," without waiting to hear it first. I pulled out my phone and sent her a message. Thinking of you today. Let's have tea soon. My treat. Then I walked home. Not lighter, exactly, but steadier. I had not lost a son. I had simply stopped pretending I still had one. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and floor polish, a scent I remembered from the first time James and I walked through these doors, hand in hand, young and exhausted after buying our first home. That was 48 years ago. The building hadn't changed much since. The paint was new, but the bones were the same. Mr. Aldridge had taken over the practice after old Mr. Colby passed, but he knew our family. He'd handled James's estate when he died, and the first version of my will back when Eric was still kind and calling me Mama. Mrs. Matthews, he said warmly, standing as I entered. It's good to see you. And you, Peter. I smiled gently. though I wish it were under different circumstances. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I understand from your call that you'd like to amend your will. Yes, I said, taking my seat. I'd like to remove my son as beneficiary, entirely, and establish a living trust in my granddaughter's name. He didn't look surprised. Maybe I wasn't the first woman of my generation to make such a request. I'll need to ask a few questions to make it official. You're of sound mind and under no duress? I'm clearer than I've been in years. He nodded and began typing. Do you wish to exclude your son completely or leave a token sum? Completely, I said without hesitation. And I want the language to be airtight. I know he'll contest it. Or his wife will. Peter pursed his lips. We can include a no contest clause. If he tries, he forfeits any possible share. Good. And the trust for your granddaughter? Would you like her to have access immediately or when she comes of age? She's nearly 18, but I want the principal protected until she's 25. She can receive small disbursements before then, education, housing, medical, and so on, but nothing lavish. Peter smiled faintly. You've thought this through. I've had years, I replied. I just never let myself face it. He pulled up a few template documents and began making notes. What's her full name? Emily Grace Matthews. Trustee? I'd like to serve as the trustee until I'm no longer able. After that, I paused. Is it possible for the bank to manage it? Certainly. We can assign a fiduciary entity. And I'd like to include a letter for her. Not legal, just personal. Can that be kept with the documents? Of course. He printed a few draft forms, and I reviewed them carefully. The ink, the language, the clarity, all of it made the change feel real. For years I had felt like a ghost, hovering at the edges of my own family. Now, here I was, speaking plainly, putting names to actions, choosing the one person who still made me feel seen. Peter looked up from the keyboard. You know, he said, I've had this same conversation with more than a few clients lately. Oh? He nodded. Older women, often mothers or grandmothers, quiet for decades. Then one day, something happens, and they walk in with a stack of papers and a very steady voice. I smiled without humor. There comes a time when being polite stops feeling noble and starts feeling foolish. He finished typing, stapled a few forms, and stood. I'll have the final versions ready by Friday. We'll need 2 witnesses when you sign. I can arrange them here. I'll be here. I stood, shook his hand, and left with a copy of the drafts in my purse. Back on the sidewalk, I paused. The world looked the same. Cars passing, people walking, the sky hung in pale October gray. But inside me, something was shifting. Not anger, not sadness either. A quiet solidness, like a floor I'd forgotten I had beneath me. That night, I sat at the dining room table and began to write the letter for Emily. Not a long one, just a few pages. Something she could hold one day and know. I saw her. I trusted her. And when the time came, she would not be alone. Emily showed up just after 4 the next afternoon. No warning, no fuss. She'd always had a quiet way of arriving, like rain before it starts. I was in the kitchen, finishing a batch of oatmeal cookies I'd made mostly out of habit. I heard the screen door creak, then her voice, soft and certain. Grandma? I turned around, wiping my hands on a towel. In here, sweetheart. She walked in, eyes scanning the kitchen like she was checking if anything had changed. She looked like her mother, same brown eyes, same serious mouth, but her hands moved like mine. Careful, deliberate, always aware of what they touched. "I hope it's okay I dropped by," she said, hugging me. "You never have to ask." We stood like that for a moment, and I felt her breathe in, like being here still gave her some kind of comfort. When she pulled back, she looked at me with something close to concern. "Did something happen yesterday?" she asked. "Dad was in a mood when he got home, said you'd canceled some things. Then he wouldn't talk about it." I moved to the stove, poured tea into 2 cups. "I made a few changes," I said. "On my birthday, I received a message from your father. And it made things clear." She frowned, sitting at the table. "What kind of message?" I hesitated, then reached for the phone on the counter and handed it to her. She read the message. 6 words, and blinked. Slowly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. He sent this to you?" I nodded. Her jaw clenched. "That's disgusting." I took my seat. It was painful, but necessary. Sometimes people show you who they've become, and all you can do is stop pretending. "I don't understand how he could talk to you like that," she said. "He's always been a little thoughtless. But this, it's not new," I said softly, just louder. Emily picked at a cookie, then looked up. "He's going to be furious." "He already is. And you're okay with that?" I met her gaze. "I'm not trying to punish him, Emily. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." She sat back in her chair. "What did you change?" "The will, the trust, the bank access, everything." She looked stunned. "You took him out of the will?" "I did." She was quiet for a long time. "I know you and I have always been close," she said slowly. "But are you sure?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sweetheart, I'm not doing this because you're perfect. I'm doing it because you're kind. You listen. You show up. You remember I exist even when you don't need anything. That matters. You matter." Her throat moved as she swallowed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything now," I replied. "Just promise me something. Anything. When the time comes, when you're older, when I'm not around, don't let people treat you like your presence is something to be tolerated. You come from strong women. Be one." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I will." I smiled. "Now help me finish these cookies. I made far too many, and you know I don't even like raisins." We baked. We laughed. We didn't talk about the money, or the house, or the storm that would inevitably arrive when her father found out what I'd done. There would be shouting, and accusations, and attempts to guilt me. But not today. Today, I had my granddaughter in my kitchen, and the smell of cinnamon in the air. I had made a decision. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone waiting to be remembered. The first call came at 7:13 a.m. Eric. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, not yet. I watched the screen light up, then go dark. He didn't leave a message. He never did. 5 minutes later, another call. Then again at 7:29. Persistent, not out of worry, but control. That was his way. Always was. I took my tea out to the porch. The morning was unusually quiet. Birds moved in the hedges, soft-footed like they, too, were trying not to disturb the day. I cradled the warm mug in my hands and told myself, not today. Today, I would hold on to the silence a little longer. The phone rang again. I turned it face down. But by noon, the pressure started. It wasn't a phone call this time. It was an email. The subject line: "Urgent. We need to talk." I opened it. A short paragraph, stiffly written, like a note to a stranger, not a mother. "Mom, I just spoke to the bank. They said all financial support has been cut off. No warning, no discussion. This is completely inappropriate. Please call me back immediately so we can fix this. No, how are you? No happy birthday. No why. Just control. Entitlement wrapped in concern. I deleted it. At 1:04, the first voicemail arrived. Mom, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this affects more than just me. You can't just cancel everything like this. We have responsibilities. Emily's school payments, the insurance, the mortgage. This is reckless. Call me. I didn't call. By 3 p.m., Marlene, his wife, was texting. Hers were more polished, the words sanded down to smooth surfaces, but underneath, pressure. Edith, we're very confused and hurt. If something is wrong, we'd like to understand. You've always been a generous part of this family, and we've counted on that stability. We're willing to forgive whatever this is, but we do need to speak soon. Forgive. That word stayed with me, as if I'd committed the betrayal, as if silence and autonomy were sins. I stared at the message for a full minute, then closed the phone. It's funny how quickly people reveal their priorities when the money stops. Around 4:30, I got up and walked into the bedroom. I opened the closet and took out the box where I kept old photos. Family trips, birthdays, blurry shots from the 90s where everyone looked sunlit and young. I sat on the bed and flipped through them slowly. There we were, on the beach. Eric in the surf, James holding him up, both of them laughing. There we were again, 20 years later, in front of the fireplace at Christmas. Emily was 8, her front tooth missing, holding the scarf I'd knitted for her. Eric had one hand on her shoulder and the other in his pocket, already half a world away. Somewhere in between, we stopped being a family and started being something else. I could track it by the gifts. When Emily was small, he'd give me thoughtful things. Books he remembered I loved, a necklace he said reminded him of me. But the last few years, nothing. Or worse, practical things I never asked for. A motion-activated trash can, a subscription to a magazine I never read. Then, this year, 6 words. Old women don't deserve presents. That's what all this was about, really. Not the money, not the will, but what was underneath. The belief that I had no value unless I was giving something. He could call all he wanted, text, rage, plead, but I wouldn't go back. I'd made my choice. I got up, returned the photos to their box, and set it gently back on the shelf. At dinner, I made soup for one and sliced a piece of bread just how I liked it. No corners left soggy. Later, I checked my phone. Another missed call. Another voicemail. I deleted it without listening. Some silences aren't empty. Some are earned. The house felt unusually still that night. Not quiet, but settled, like a body that's finally stopped bracing for impact. I sat in the living room with the lamp on low, the clock ticking softly behind me. In my lap, a notebook, lined, leather-bound. I hadn't written in it in years, not really, just grocery lists and reminders. But tonight, I opened it to a fresh page, and I started writing a letter. Not to Emily, not even to Eric, but to myself. Dear Sarah, this is what it feels like to stop begging to be treated kindly. This is what it feels like when silence is no longer submission, but choice. I wrote slowly, thoughtfully, each word like lifting a stone out of a riverbed. I had never been dramatic, never been the sort to scream or throw plates. I'd swallowed too much for too long. But now I wanted a record, not of what was taken, but of what I had reclaimed. I wrote about the small things. How Eric hadn't called me on James's death anniversary in 5 years. How he rolled his eyes when I asked if Emily could stay the weekend. How his voice changed when he said "my mother" in front of people, like it was a category, not a name. I wrote about how I'd paid off his credit cards when he was 32 and ashamed to admit he'd mismanaged money. How I'd stayed silent when Marlene told me I was too involved in Emily's upbringing. How I gave and gave, not because I was noble, but because I was afraid he'd disappear completely if I didn't. And then he disappeared anyway. I wrote until my hand ached. Then I set the pen down and looked around the room. Everything in here had a history. The armchair James used to fall asleep in after dinner, the cabinet with the chipped corner Eric knocked into when he was 12, the curtains Emily helped me pick out when she was still small enough to fit in my lap. It was a museum of effort, my years, my life. And I wasn't going to leave it all to someone who looked at me and saw inconvenience. At 9:42 p.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't move at first, just sat there, listening to the sound echo through the hallway. A second chime followed, then silence. I got up slowly, walked to the peephole. Eric. He wasn't alone. Marlene stood a few paces behind, arms folded, her face pulled tight. Eric looked tired, not sad, not apologetic, just worn out. Like someone arriving not to make peace but to collect what he thought he was owed. I didn't open the door. He knocked. Once. Twice. "Mom," he called. "We need to talk." I stood there behind the door, heart steady. I could feel the outline of my body. Not the aching joints or the sagging skin, but the presence of myself. I was here. I existed. And I would not be summoned. "I'm not coming in," he said, voice flat. "But this can't stand." A pause. Marlene said something I couldn't hear. He answered, more sharply. "I'm not going to argue on the porch." Another pause, then footsteps retreating. A car door. The engine. Gone. I turned the lock and opened the door. Not for them, but for the night air. It was cool. Fragrant with the scent of the garden I hadn't tended in weeks. The stars were sharp overhead. I stood there for a moment longer, barefoot, hand on the doorframe. And then I said it out loud, softly, to the wind. "I am not your second option. Not anymore." Then I closed the door. The next morning, I opened the curtains and made coffee without thinking about who might call. Who might come by? Who might be displeased? That alone felt like a revolution. I sat at the table with my cup and an old paperback I'd started years ago but never finished. One of those quiet, character-driven novels where not much happens on the surface, but everything happens underneath. It felt fitting. At 9:17, the landline rang. No one calls the landline anymore. It's a relic, like me. The only ones who ever used it were James and the pharmacy. I answered because I was curious. "Mrs. Matthews." The voice was female, unfamiliar. "Yes?" "This is Danielle from Crescent Hill Assisted Living. Your son and daughter-in-law stopped by our offices yesterday to request a tour and inquire about availability. They listed you as a potential resident and emergency contact. We just wanted to confirm." I didn't let her finish. "I'm not interested," I said flatly. A beat of silence. Then, "Oh, I see. Would you like us to remove your information from our records?" "Immediately." "I'll take care of that. Thank you for your time." I hung up. I sat very still. That's what they'd been doing. Not just trying to undo the bank decisions, not just calling to express their concern. They were preparing the next step, moving me out of my home, quietly, bureaucratically, as if I were a file to be transferred. I pushed the book aside and walked to the front window. The neighborhood looked the same. Children biking past, someone walking a dog, Mrs. Loring tending her marigolds. But something had shifted. I wasn't just disappointed in Eric anymore. I was done. James and I bought this house in 1975. It was a fixer-upper then, the kind of place everyone said was too much work. But we made it ours. Every nail, every coat of paint, every dent in the banister from little Eric's toy trucks. And now my son wanted me out of it like a tenant overstaying her lease. I called Peter Aldridge, the lawyer. Peter, it's Sarah Matthews. Quick question. Is there any legal move I can take to ensure I remain in my home for as long as I choose? There is, he said, without missing a beat. We can amend the trust documents to designate the home as your irrevocable primary residence. It will prevent forced sale or transfer, even in cases of family dispute. Do it. He didn't ask why, just said, consider it done. I hung up and stood there in the quiet. My house, my life, was now under siege, not by strangers, but by blood. Eric had made his choice, to turn me into an obligation. And now I'd made mine, to become something more than a name on a list of assets. At noon, Emily texted, "Grandma, I heard something from Dad. I think they're trying to get you into a facility." "Are you okay?" I replied. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart. But I'm glad you checked." 5 minutes later, she called. "Why would they do that?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. "Why wouldn't they talk to you first?" "Because it was never about what I wanted," I said. "It was about what was convenient for them." "I'm so sorry." "You don't need to be sorry for them." There was silence on the line. Then, "Do you want me to come over?" "Not today. I need a little time." "Okay. But if you change your mind, I'll call. I promise." After we hung up, I walked through the house slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the doorway, where we used to mark Eric's height. I wasn't leaving, not by their hand. This was my life, and I was reclaiming it, inch by inch, room by room. Emily showed up anyway. I heard the knock just after sunset. Soft, quick, unmistakably hers. She never rang the bell. Always knocked like she didn't want to disturb the walls. I opened the door, and there she stood, wearing that oversized denim jacket she loved and clutching a paper bag from the corner bakery. "I brought you the walnut bread," she said quietly. "The kind you like with butter." I stepped aside, and she came in without asking. The air between us was warm with understanding. No need for apologies. No need for permission. We moved to the kitchen as if we'd always been doing this. And maybe we had. She sliced the bread. I made tea. When we sat, she didn't start with questions. She handed me a slice, watched me take a bite, and only then said, "It's worse than I thought." I looked at her. "They've been talking about putting you in a place for a while," she said, eyes down. I didn't know. Not really. But I overheard something last month. Mom said, "It'll be easier once the house is out of her hands." Dad said, "One way or another we'll get her settled." I put the bread down. "They don't think you can live alone anymore," Emily added. "But it's not about safety. It's about inheritance. It's always been about the house. They talk like it's already theirs." I sat back, trying not to let my face show what I felt. Emily's voice dropped. "I think they're afraid of you now. They don't understand how you pulled away so fast, how you got there before they could. They thought I'd never say no?" She nodded. "They underestimated you." For a long time, We sat without speaking. The tea grew cold. "I don't want anything from you," she said finally. "But I need you to know something. I love you. Not the obligation kind of love. Not the because I'm supposed to kind. Just love. Because you've always been there. Because you've always been honest. Because you let me be me." My throat tightened, but I kept it together. "I know," I said softly. "That's why you're the only one who's in the will now." She blinked. "Wait, what?" I nodded. "The trust is in your name, the house, the savings, everything. You won't get it all at once, but it's yours. And only yours." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw that little girl again, the one who used to fall asleep on my lap after cartoons, who once said, "Grandma, you smell like sugar in stories." "Grandma, I didn't come here for that." "I know. That's why you're the only one I trust with it." She didn't speak, just reached across the table and took my hand. "I won't let them near you," she said. "Whatever happens." I smiled. "I'm not worried. I've been near enough to them to know what they are." The porch light flickered once outside. A moth tapped against the window. "I don't want to fight," I said. "I don't want to live out my last years arguing with my son. I just want peace." "You'll have it," she said, "even if I have to stand between you and everyone else." I hope it doesn't come to that. But I knew it might. As she left, she hugged me longer than usual. When the door closed behind her, the silence was no longer empty. It felt like safety. I turned off the lights, walked back to the kitchen, and washed the cups by hand. Not because I had to, but because it was a quiet thing I still had the power to do. My hands, my home, my rhythm, they could scheme all they wanted. This was my life, and I wasn't done living it yet. That night, I sat at the desk in my bedroom, the same one James built for me the year Eric started school, and opened a fresh sheet of paper. I wasn't sure what made me start writing. Maybe it was the way Emily's words had settled into me, soft and firm at once. Maybe it was knowing the next confrontation was coming, or maybe it was simply time. I wrote a letter to Eric, not to send, not ever, but to say the things I never let myself say aloud, the things I'd swallowed for decades in the name of keeping the peace, words that tasted bitter and freeing all at once. Eric, I was there when you took your first breath, and I will not be there when you take your last. Not because I don't want to be, but because you've made it clear I no longer belong in your life except as a line on a check. You were the boy I carried through night fevers, who clung to my apron in the grocery store. I loved you harder than I knew how to love myself. I fed you before I fed myself, clothed you with hands that patched and stitched until they bled. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person. You saw obligation, weight, an old woman in a chair. Or worse, a vault, quietly funding your life. You stopped calling. You stopped listening. You made holidays about schedules and rules. And still, I waited. I waited for the moment you'd turn back and remember the softness of me, the steadiness of me. But it never came. What came was a message. 6 words. Words I will never forget. Old women don't deserve presents. Eric, I gave you everything. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. And now, I choose something else. I choose to stop pretending that blood is enough. You made me invisible. I've made myself whole again. I signed the letter, folded it, and placed it in the top drawer. It wasn't anger that pushed my pen. It was clarity, a final note in a symphony that had played too long with broken strings. The next morning, I opened the curtains to see Eric's car already parked in front of the house. So, it had begun. I took my time, made coffee, fed the birds. He rang the bell once, twice. I let him wait. When I finally opened the door, he didn't bother with a greeting. "We need to talk," he said, stepping past me into the foyer. Not a question, not a request. Marlene wasn't with him. I noticed that immediately. He wanted this moment for himself, not out of respect, out of strategy. He turned to face me in the living room, arms crossed. "What the hell is going on?" I stayed calm. "Good morning, Eric." "Don't do that," he snapped. "Don't act like nothing's happened. The accounts are frozen. The trust has changed. The lawyer won't speak to me without written consent. What are you doing?" "Taking my life back," I said simply. He stared at me, mouth open. Then he laughed, not kindly. "You're being manipulated," he said. "Emily's gotten into your head." "No," I replied. "But you tried. For years." "You don't understand what this means," he continued. "Do you know how much we've put into your care? How much time?" I raised a hand. "Stop." He blinked. "You don't put time into something you discard," I said. "You don't claim sacrifice when you only ever gave out of convenience." His face changed, not softened, hardened. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "This isn't rational." "On the contrary," I said. "This is the clearest I've been since your father died." He stepped closer. "You're going to regret this. When you're alone. When Emily goes off to college and you're sitting in this house by yourself." "I'd rather be alone with dignity," I said, "than surrounded by people who see me as a burden." He stood there, breathing hard. I didn't flinch. I didn't fold. "I'm leaving," he said finally, voice clipped. "You already did," I said quietly, and I closed the door behind him. After Eric left, the silence in the house felt different. Not empty, clear. Like a room after a storm has passed through and taken all the dust with it. I walked slowly through each room, letting my fingers brush the backs of chairs, the edges of frames, the surfaces of memories. I wasn't mourning him. Not anymore. I was mourning the years I'd spent twisting myself into silence for his comfort. He said I'd regret it. But standing in my own home, with no one shouting, no one asking for more, I felt only steadiness. I made myself a late lunch, soup and toast, nothing fancy, and ate it at the kitchen table with the newspaper open beside me. There was a local story about a woman turning 100 and throwing a party for herself. I smiled, a quiet, private little smile. Maybe I'll do the same. In the afternoon, I pulled down the old metal box from the top of the hallway closet. Inside were house papers, the deed, the renovation permits, even the faded Polaroids James took the day we signed. I sat cross-legged on the rug, sifting through them. This house, this life, every inch of it bore our fingerprints. It had never been perfect, but it had been ours. And for the past decade, Eric had treated it like a pending asset, something that would eventually transition, as he once called it, not a home, but a number on a spreadsheet. Even when the back roof started leaking 3 years ago and I asked him for help, not money, just a recommendation for a contractor, he told me to wait, that he'd handle it when the time was right. The time, apparently, was never right until he believed it would be his. I found the receipt from the handyman I eventually hired myself. $3,200, paid in full. I'd used my savings, quietly, and told no one. That was my pattern. Fix things myself. Don't trouble anyone. Stay small. Not anymore. I tucked the documents into a fresh folder labeled House Legal, No Transfer. Bold, black letters. I was done pretending I owed this roof, these walls, to anyone but myself. Later, I stepped outside and trimmed the lavender bush by the walkway. A young couple passed by with a stroller. I didn't know their names, but they always smiled. Today, the woman stopped. "I hope you don't mind me saying," she said gently, "but your granddaughter, the one with the long braid, she's lovely. I see her visit you sometimes. You're lucky." I smiled. "I know I am." After she left, I sat on the porch and watched the light change. The house across the street caught the last of the gold, warm, soft, fading into evening. And that's when I heard the car. Not Eric's this time. Smaller, quieter. Emily. She parked at the curb, climbed out slowly, and walked up the path with something wrapped in brown paper under her arm. "I brought something," she said, handing it to me. I unwrapped it. A framed sketch, pencil on thick, rough paper, of my house, my porch, the lavender bush, the front window, even the crooked mailbox James never fixed. "I drew it yesterday," she said. "I wanted you to have it." I looked up at her, not trusting my voice for a moment. "Thank you," I managed. "I thought maybe it could go over the fireplace," she said. "Or your bedroom wall. Just somewhere you can see it, as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" She hesitated. "That you chose yourself." I reached for her hand. "You see me better than anyone. You made it easy." We went inside. She helped me hang the sketch above the mantel. When we stepped back, I saw what she had done. She hadn't drawn the house exactly as it was. She'd added light in the windows, warmth spilling out onto the steps, like something waiting for someone to come home. "It looks alive," I whispered. "It is," she said. That night, after she left, I sat in my armchair and looked at the drawing. Eric could keep his resentment, his calculations, his wounded pride. I had something better now, a home that was still mine, and someone who saw me not as old or finished or fading, but simply as Sarah. The next day began with another envelope. It came by certified mail, the kind you have to sign for. The courier didn't smile, didn't speak, just held out the clipboard, had me scribble something, and handed over a thick manila folder with my name typed across the front. I didn't have to open it to guess what it was, but I did anyway. Inside, a letterhead from Eric's lawyer. Neat, impersonal legal phrasing. "Our client, Mr. Eric Matthews, expresses concern regarding recent changes to your estate planning. He wishes to initiate a dialogue concerning his exclusion from said estate and the circumstances surrounding the abrupt cancellation of financial obligations previously assumed by yourself." Then came the language of potential misunderstanding, preferred mediation, and steps to resolution. I laughed, not bitterly, not cruelly, just once, softly, like someone who'd finally seen the end of a long, grim joke. Eric wasn't grieving a relationship, he was assembling a case. I folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and placed it on top of the pile marked "No action required." I wasn't going to be intimidated by stationary and veiled threats. Not now. Not after everything. By noon, I was at my lawyer's office. Peter read the letter with one raised eyebrow. "Would you like me to respond?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not yet. Let him stew in it a while." Peter smiled. Not the smug kind, but the knowing kind. The kind that says, "Finally, someone's waking up." We spent the rest of the hour finalizing the home designation paperwork. The house was now legally protected. No one could sell it, seize it, or recommend I relocate without my full signed consent. I've also added a stipulation, Peter said, as I signed the last form, that Emily be notified immediately should any attempt to override your wishes occur. Good, I said. She'll handle it better than I would. He looked at me for a moment. Sarah, he said, folding the documents, I've known you a long time, seen you be gracious more times than I can count, but I've never seen you this clear. I spent years being polite, I said. Turns out it just made me easier to ignore. I left the office lighter. On the way home, I stopped by the local market and picked up things only I liked. The tea James used to say smelled like potpourri. That strange jam I once bought on a whim. A little cake, just enough for one. When I got back, I placed the cake on my good china plate and sat on the porch. It wasn't my birthday, it wasn't any special occasion, but I was celebrating something. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the voicemail Eric had left late the night before, the one where his voice cracked and he said, "Mom, you're making this really hard." It had always been hard. He just hadn't noticed because I never let it show. At sunset, I brought the mail in. Bills, a coupon, and a card. No return address, just my name in a familiar looping hand. I opened it. Inside, a watercolor painting of a chair by a window. My chair, done in delicate, uncertain strokes. The note read, "Grandma, I wanted you to know you're the reason I applied to art school. You always saw the things no one else saw. Thank you for teaching me how to see myself. Love, Emily." I held the card to my chest and breathed. For all the years I thought I was invisible, someone had been watching, learning. Carrying me forward in brushstrokes and late-night hugs and quiet, fierce loyalty. Let Eric hire lawyers. Let them send letters. Let the noise come. I had already made the only decision that mattered, and I wasn't going back. 2 days passed before he came back. No warning, no appointment, just the sound of tires crunching gravel and the sharp slam of a car door. I was in the garden, kneeling by the hydrangeas, pruning back the dead stems for fall. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, the familiar rhythm of someone who never learned how to enter gently. "Mom," he said. I stood slowly, dusted my hands on my trousers. Eric. He didn't look like himself. Not the version I remembered anyway. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair grayer than I'd noticed before. And yet, he still carried himself like someone who expected the room, or in this case, the garden, to bend around him. "We need to talk," he said. "I've already said everything I needed to." He glanced toward the porch, then back at me. "Can we at least sit?" I thought about saying no, but the part of me that once taught him how to hold a spoon, how to tie his shoes, still remembered, and remembered with tenderness, even now. We sat on the bench near the roses, the same one where James used to read the paper on Sundays, where Emily once handed me a bouquet of weeds and called them wishing flowers. Eric leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I don't understand what's happening," he said. "You've cut me out of everything. You won't return my calls. You've put Emily in charge of things she's too young to handle. She's not too young to treat people kindly. That's not fair," he snapped. "You're punishing me. I'm protecting myself." His hands balled into fists. "I've been there for you." "When?" I asked softly. He blinked. "What do you mean? When have you been there for me, Eric? Not for the house? Not for the accounts? Not when you needed help? When were you there for me?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. I continued. Was it when you sent that message on my birthday? Was it when you tried to tour facilities behind my back? Was it when you let months go by without visiting unless you needed something signed? I was busy, he said. I was dying, I said, voice flat. He turned to me sharply. Not literally, I continued, but piece by piece, and you never noticed. We sat in silence. You were always strong, he said eventually. You never needed anything. No, I corrected. I never asked for anything. That's not the same. He swallowed hard. So what now? We're just done? After everything? I didn't end this, I said. You did. I just finally accepted it. But I'm your son. That used to mean something, I said. And it still can. But not like this. He stared at the roses, at the dirt under my fingernails. He looked like he wanted to say more, to argue, to retreat. But for once, he didn't. He stood up. Emily's turning 18 next week, he said. She wants you there. I know, she told me. She won't talk to me. That's between you and her, I said. But if you want her to talk to you, start by apologizing to someone. Genuinely. Not because you're trying to get something, but because it's the right thing to do. He didn't respond. He walked back toward the car, then paused at the door. I never wanted it to be like this. Neither did I. And then he drove away. I stood there for a long time after he left, the garden shears still in my hand, the wind tugging softly at the edges of my sweater. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I wasn't hopeful either, but I was clear. I had spent most of my life trying to be soft enough for everyone else to lean on. Now, for the first time, I had become something else. Unmovable. Rooted. Like the house behind me. Like the roses I'd planted long before Eric was born. Emily's 18th birthday arrived on a Saturday. The house was quiet that morning. No voices, no plans, no errands. Just the steady rhythm of the kettle and the soft creak of the floorboards as I moved through my morning. I'd wrapped her gift the night before. Not expensive, not grand, but chosen. A silver locket that had belonged to my mother with a note inside, folded small. To carry what matters, not what's expected. She'd invited me to her birthday dinner herself, called 3 times to make sure I'd come. It won't be big, she'd said, just a few friends. I want you there. That afternoon, I dressed with care. Not out of vanity, but respect. A soft navy dress. My hair pinned up the way Emily liked it. I even wore perfume, the one James used to say, made me smell like the inside of a warm book. When I arrived, Emily answered the door herself, barefoot, cheeks pink with excitement. You look beautiful, she said, pulling me in for a hug. And you look like someone the world better be ready for. She grinned and led me into the house. There were balloons, laughter, music I didn't recognize. A group of teenagers in the kitchen, politely waving. Emily's friends, kind-faced, a little awkward around me, but sweet. I gave her the locket in the corner of the dining room while the others were busy slicing cake. She opened it slowly, like it might break. Oh, she whispered. Grandma? I didn't say anything, just watched her hands hold it like something sacred. I'll wear it, she said. Every day. You don't have to. I want to. She hugged me again. I felt her press her forehead against my shoulder for just a moment, like she was grounding herself. Then I saw Eric. He was standing near the back hallway, alone, watching. I hadn't noticed him arrive. He looked tired again, or maybe just small in a way I'd never let myself admit before. He nodded at me once. I returned the gesture, nothing more. He didn't approach. Neither did I. This wasn't about him. Later, as the evening wound down and the guests trickled out, Emily walked me to my car. "She didn't come," I said gently, referring to Marlene. "No," she replied. "She didn't approve of me inviting you." "And your father?" He said nothing, which honestly is worse. We stood there in the orange wash of the porch light, leaves rustling in the early autumn wind. "You've grown up," I said. "I had to." "You didn't. You chose to. That's different." She looked at me then, really looked, and said, "Thank you for choosing me." "I didn't choose you instead of someone else," I said. "I chose you because of who you are." She nodded, eyes glassy again, and then smiled. "Will you come to my art exhibit next month?" "Try and stop me." I drove home in the dark, the locket's empty box resting on the seat beside me like a folded promise. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even tired. I felt something better. Useful. Not because of what I could give, but because of what I had kept. I hadn't let them rewrite me. I hadn't let their smallness shrink the borders of my love. And now that love, the honest kind, was moving forward in another set of hands. 3 weeks after Emily's birthday, I received a letter in the mail. Not from Eric. Not from Marlene. From a solicitor representing them both. Thinly veiled language, again. Inquiries, clarifications, veiled suggestions of emotional distress and questionable influence. As if I were a confused old woman nudged off course by her granddaughter. But I wasn't confused, and I wasn't going to respond. I placed the letter in the drawer beside the others, in the folder now marked Attempts. No response, no energy. Just documentation. That's all their efforts deserved now. That afternoon, I went back to the garden. The first frost was close. The lavender was browning, and the last of the roses were beginning to droop. I trimmed them with care, whispering a quiet thanks under my breath. For blooming, for staying, for reminding me that beauty doesn't need to be permanent to matter. At dusk, Emily came by. She had a thermos of cocoa and a blanket over her shoulder. "I thought we could sit outside," she said, "just for a little while." We sat on the porch wrapped in wool and quiet. The stars were just beginning to show, faint and patient. "I got in," she said suddenly. I turned to her. "Art school, the one I was scared to apply to." I smiled. I never had a doubt. She looked down at her hands. "It's across the country. I'll be far. You'll be right where you're meant to be." "I'm scared." "That just means you care." She was quiet a moment. Then, "Will you be okay? Here? Alone?" I took her hand. Alone isn't always lonely. I've lived long enough to know the difference. I don't want them to come after you again." "They might try," I said, "but it won't matter. I've set everything up, the trust, the deed, the protections. They can knock at the door, but I won't answer." Emily nodded, biting the edge of her lip like she was holding something in. "I'm proud of you," I said. "Not because you got in, but because you dared to ask for something bigger." She looked at me then, eyes full, not with tears, but with meaning. She didn't need to say anything else. I knew. After she left, I stood in the doorway and watched the taillights disappear. The house was quiet again. Still. And for the first time in years, I felt no trace of waiting. No one else needed to come. I moved through the rooms slowly, turning off lights. When I reached the bedroom, I paused by the dresser, where the sketch Emily gave me hung above a candle. The house, lit from within. Steady. Safe. In the mirror, I caught my own reflection. Older, yes. Softer in places, but not smaller, not less. Just clear. I thought about James, about the way he used to say, "Let's make this place ours," even when the roof leaked and the heater failed and the garden refused to grow. And we did. We made something, something real. I had loved, I had given, and now I had chosen. Chosen to protect what I built. Chosen to be more than useful. Chosen, finally, to be enough. Not for them, for myself. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, share it, leave a comment, or simply sit with it a while. We write these stories not just to be heard, but to remember that we are not alone.